Hello and welcome to a much different character review than the others. Recently, we got ourselves our first set of buffs to characters in Genshin. With the release of Durin, they decided to bring the Nodecry 2 characters mechanic to other regions' characters, and since Durin is from Mondstadt, it was some of the Monstalters that got them. Usually, I would be pretty angry with such a mechanic as I was with the Nodecry one, but the difference here is that the units getting these buffs were very much and are very usable without the need to use the Hexerei buff, compared to Nodecry characters having their kit cut in half if you don't use that. So I was, much more calm on that, seeing some buffs to older characters even with this mechanic. Seemed like a nice thing. By the way, I will call them just Hex characters, not full Hexerei, so just so you know. So, shall we begin? Just like the Nodecry characters, having 2 Hex characters in your team will activate the Hex talent and give you a bunch of effects, which you need to unlock this talent by doing the quest that you do. Usually the main effect is included in the talent, but there are some effects that are unlocked through constellations, which is kind of a double-edged sword. For the 4 stars, it's not much of a problem since they are 4 stars from the beginning of the game, so getting them to C6 isn't that hard, especially if you've been playing the game for a while, compared to, well, any newer ones, especially since the Star Glitter shop has never been updated, so, those 4 stars are the only ones that appear in the Star Glitter shop to give you some extra cons. Also, you can invite one of the 4 stars that got buffs after you do some of the quests, so definitely do that. But for the 5 stars, on one side it makes their very bad cons actually desirable, and on the other hand, it makes their cons desirable, and the amount of players that got any constellations on the Hex 5 stars, I would guess, is very, very small, except for any of the standard characters that got the buffs. So, yeah, and since the Genshin rerun program and schedule is just shit, and we simply don't get that often the nationwide banner, actually. We really need to have one just like every 2 versions or something. Every other version should have one of these, actually. I genuinely believe that we should do that. But yeah, like getting at any of the cons of these 5 stars, yeah, good fucking luck. And speaking of, who are the characters that got the Hex buffs treatment? Well, except for the upcoming Varka and of course Nicole, we have Venti, Durin, Mona, Albedo, Klee, Fischl, Sucrose, and Razor. Let's see one by one what effects they got. Starting with Durin, who is the simplest one. Durin's Hex buff buffs his 2 different burst effects that he gains from one of his Ascension talents. In his white form, the buff further decreases the enemy's resistance to a total of 35%, and for his black form, he gains a total of 70% extra damage to Vaporize and Melt, which is really, really nice. The damage buff is quite significant in the teams where he is a really good off-field damage dealer, while the extra res reduction is mostly important on teams with Geo, Dendro, and Anemo DPSs, since they cannot use Viridescent Verener. Yes, they have ways to reduce the resistances of those elements, but this is an even extra one, because with Viridescent Venerer and then stacking Durin or anybody, like the many other ways that you can reduce resistances compare again to Geo, Dendro, and Anemo, you see why it's fine to use Durin just without another Hex character and why the damage buff is the more significant one. So yeah, for Durin, the Hex effects aren't a necessity per se, but they are very useful. Next up is Venti. And Venti went from being designed as a DPS, but played as a support, because nobody really played Crit Venti, with DPS cons for, some reason, to a DPS/support with DPS/support constellations, because his Hex buff makes it so when his ultimate is active, Venti's normal attacks become Anemo-infused and pierce enemies, and their scaling is similar to Scaramouche, where it uses the attack talent multiplier, but then multiplied on top. And also when those attacks hit enemies, they extend the duration and cooldown of the ultimate up to a maximum of 2 seconds and 1 second respectively. They kind of gave a lore reason for the cooldown thingy, but thankfully it's not a big cooldown increase, else that would have been really stupid. So it's kind of, usually you kind of don't necessarily want to mix a lot of gameplay and lore related stuff if it's gonna be annoying. So again, since this is just a 1 second extra cooldown, and you get 2 seconds of the duration, again, thankfully it's not annoying, so it's fine to include your lore stuff here. But that is the DPS part of the buff, because also while his ult is active, when a character triggers Swirl, they gain a 50% damage bonus, and the ultimate gets some extra damage. Yes, it still helps Venti because he triggers Swirl and gains a 50 damage bonus, but also, if anybody else is in the Swirl reaction, they gain an extra damage bonus. Like, it's pretty good. It's DPS and supportive. Well, this turns Venti into an actual Anemo DPS compared to what Crit Venti used to be. Not gonna lie, his playstyle though isn't anything crazy compared to somebody like Skara, where, you know, you've gotta manage your skill and dodge when you have this buff, and you get the idea. Because with Venti, you use his ultimate and just spam attacks. It's not until you get some constellations that you get some extra effects and that kind of make the playstyle a little bit more interesting. And speaking of those, they are just a mix of kind of support, but DPS leaning more so towards the DPS. C1 is some extra arrows that deal some extra damage when you fire his normal attacks. C2 gets buffed Anemo res reduction and also gives Venti a special skill that deals 300% of the original skill damage. And you might know or not that Venti's skill has some really insane multipliers. His C4 is an Anemo damage bonus to the entire party, which is mostly useful for the future Varka owners. And lastly, his C6 gives him 100% crit damage to enemies damaged by his ult. So C6 Venti ends up a really powerful DPS. His attacks deal a lot of damage, and then with the C6 crit damage buff and the insane 3x damaging skill on top, his special skill is an insane nuke actually. Oh, he also got a new bow, the greedy bitch. He has a Skyward Harp from his OG release, Elegy on his first rerun, and his new one now. God damn it, Venti, stop it. Let's check Mona next. She also got some interesting effects herself, and actually she's the only standard 5-star to get any buffs, which is pretty interesting considering I can think of at least 2 other characters that could have also used these buffs, and they're not that separated from the Hexen's So, you know, maybe we could have given those guys buffs, except for instead of Mona. Anyways, Mona is a weird situation. They want her to stay on the field and use her attacks that will automatically proc charge attacks while being a Vaporize support. Even though everybody wants to use Mona because she gives an insane damage bonus through her ult and then keep her off the field. Her base Hex buff gives her stacks when she attacks enemies affected by her Omen with a max of 3. And when another party member triggers Vaporize, those stacks are consumed to increase the damage of that vape hit up to 15% because it's 5 per stack. And also her attacks increase the Omen's duration up to another 8 seconds on top of the original duration. The idea is to use her with Durin, where Durin uses his black form and gains a ton of Vaporize damage, and then Mona is on the field spamming attacks to increase Durin's Vape Burst hits, because the stacks get lost when one Vaporize attack hits, so Mona needs to non-stop attack to get the stacks back. It would have been nice if that wasn't the case, but it is, because like I kind of want to use her with Hutao and vape all of Hutao's attacks, but I don't. As for her constellations, they are very supportive. They start off very supportive. Her C1 gets buffed so that when off-field characters trigger a Hydro reaction, the extra damage that the con usually gave is now multiplied by 1.6 times that, and you can see where the Durin thing comes in. It's really Mona Durin combo, seriously. Her C2 makes the first attack after using her burst auto-proc a charged attack, and also charged attacks will give party members an 80 EM boost, which in general is actually kind of nice. Like even in the non-Mona Durin combo, like just use Mona's burst, cast a normal attack that will proc a charge attack, and now you gave an 80 EM boost to everybody. So like if you switch away and use, again, as I said, somebody like Hutao, she'll gain an 80 EM boost. That's really nice. Her C4 now not only grants crit rate on Omen affected enemies, but also crit damage, but only on Hexerei characters, which is really annoying, and again shows you the Mona Durin combo, motherfuckers. And lastly, her C6 just buffs her charged attacks even more against Omen-affected enemies. Kind of a bummer that her C6 has no supporting effect, but everything else does, so she gets a pass. This means at least that C6 isn't a necessity to unlock some giga-crazy support effect. So it's pretty, so that's fine. C6 Mona, it's just gonna deal some kind of extra damage. Maybe you can build her a bit more DPS while playing the Mona Durin combo, right? Like build her a bit of DPS if you have her C6. But for the most part, everything else is supporting Durin actually, and a little bit on everybody else. Next up is Albedo. And he also got a really big buff. There was a lot of favoritism here, especially with Albedo. First is that he has ways to keep his skill on the field, because after he deals skill damage within a 20 seconds window of casting his skill, I know that kind of sounds weird the way that's how it's written, by the way. Actually, it's written a little bit worse, I would say. But basically, 20 seconds after using Albedo's skill, if he deals skill damage, he will generate a silver isotoma, which is just his normal flower. It behaves exactly the same. But yeah, he generates another flower. So, and even if his normal flower is broken, you've got that 20 seconds window to deal skill damage, so, like, it will still work. So yeah, like, he has ways to summon extra flowers that deal extra damage, and also have some extra flowers if the normal flower is destroyed, so that's really nice. And additionally, when Albedo casts his skill, he will increase the damage of everything, basically, by 8% for every 1000 def he owns. And if any silver isotomas are created, Hexerei characters get an even bigger same buff. It's the same buff, but it's with a bigger multiplier and a bigger limit. Also, one of his Ascension talents gets upgraded. His first talent gets buffed, where if a Silver Isotoma is on the field, the damage to enemies below 50 HP he gets is even more buffed. And now we get to his cons. His C1 now gives him a 50% def buff, so that is even more damage on everything he gets, plus an easier way to max out his Hex buff. His C2 is really nice, because now not only do you get the def scaling to his burst, but also when he's off field and those C2 stacks reach the maximum amount, he will basically auto-cast a burst, and it will also activate his EM buff from his second Assassin talent. He becomes a mini Sucrose buff that also deals insane damage. His C2 is insane. Genuinely, just free bursts, free Albedo bursts that have def scaling, and then also give you 125 EM if you ever need it. That is really good. His C4 then turns him into another character. It turns him into like a Zhan Yun, basically, because he can allow characters to jump up and plunge attack freely. It's insane. And lastly, his C6 makes his actual burst when you cast it a complete nuke, because it gains like some insane def scaling. And the last of the 5 stars is Klee, who got a general buff actually. Now her attack animations aren't as cancerous to use as before, so if you use her in the Imaginarium Theater like me, she isn't cancer to play. And in all honesty, Klee's buffs can all be described as she is now an actual pyro DPS. All her effects are about increasing her damage and some quality of life stuff that directly and indirectly increases her overall DPS. In all honesty, I am kind of like vaguely talking about Klee because I don't own her, I don't play Klee in the slightest. But generally though, if you read the buffs, they're all just damage increases and again, just direct and indirect ways to up her DPS in the team. That's about it. Klee is still kind of... Yeah, you know, we brought Alice in the same patch, but her kid did not get the favoritism that Albedo fucking got. Let's now move on and finish the video with the 4 stars, who all get a base buff, and then their C6 is the only constellation that gives them a further buff. But with these 4 stars, as said, you kind of should have them at C6, especially if you've played a bit. Starting with Sucrose, who didn't need any buffs, and the buffs she did get are seriously pointless. The only buff she got is that after using either her skill or burst, Hex characters and non-Hex characters get just pointless damage buffs. We're talking about 5 and 7% damage bonus. They really just gave her these buffs because the actual full numbers are most likely chemistry constant jokes. I'm pretty sure that's what they are. And then her C6 just buffs the damage that Hex characters get, but it's still pretty pointless. It's like, wow, 12% damage bonus to Hex characters. Thank you. I mean, again, Sucrose was already really, really powerful, but then this is kind of like a slap in the face. I mean, yeah, it turns Sucrose into a Hex character, so we can use other characters with her, but again, something a bit better. Maybe some energy recharge. That would have been nice. Generally, maybe an energy recharge because her Assassin talent is a Nemo damage bonus. Anyways, Razor next got some really interesting buffs that really helped him jump up his DPS in his Overload team, because he really doesn't have any other teams, honestly. His buff gives his Wolf stand extra damage based on his attack, and also when Razor is using his stand and he gets more sigils from his skill than the max, they will automatically be consumed instead of needing to use his hold skill. But his C6 is where things actually get interesting, because now, when Razor uses his skill, he immediately gets the max amount of sigils instead of needing to use like 4 skills to trigger the Hex effect. So you just one skill, another skill that will go 3, 3, 3 basically, and like it's just, yeah, that's how it goes, and it just immediately consumes everything, and it just... yeah, that's the chain. Also, after consuming the sigils, he gets a 10% crit rate and 50% crit damage buff. So, really nice. You get the non-stop consuming of the sigils that triggers a lightning attack, and then you get the extra stats on top of that, and like it's all good. If you have a C6 Severus and also a C6 Bennett to support a C6 Razor, then I highly suggest trying them out with someone like Fischl, which yes we will get to, because it's really fun actually. You might see it in the background footage. I don't have a C6 Severus in the slightest. Actually, this is like C2 maximum. But it was still fun to use Razor. Give him something like Thundering Fury to non-stop spam his skill, while also doing Pyro normal attacks with Bennett's C6, and you get a really good Pyro Electro DPS, seriously. And now we get to our last character, and I specifically left her last because Fischl is now God. Pack it up, everybody. All of your other supports now pale in comparison to Fischl. She was already a god with her battering, electro application, and sub DPS capabilities, and now she's here to take the supporting throne as well. Her Hexerei buff makes it so that depending on the electro reaction that you trigger, except for Superconduct and Quicken, because fuck those I guess, Fischl gives an insane stat buff. If you trigger Overload, she gives 22.5% attack, while if you trigger Electro/Lunar Charge, she gives 90 EM. But it gets better, because at C6, those buffs get doubled! She gives a total of 45% attack and 180 EM! And it gets better! Slap on an elegy for the end, and now you got an extra 20% attack buff and 100 EM! Hey, let me ask you, how much is the average Sucrose buff? Have you ever seen a Flint with 1000 plus EM and 3k plus attack? Because I have, because that's my Flints, baby! Sucrose plus Fischl with Elegy makes my Flints' damage skyrocket. Fuck out of here with Inefa and Columbina. I got a pretty good substitute for them. We might not have any survivability, but skill and dodges will have to take care of that. It's insane. Like in an Overload team, she gives so much attack on top of everything else. Remember, she might not contribute a ton of damage in Lunar Charged teams, even though the EM buff buffs the general Lunar Charged damage to high hell. In a Severus team, where attack and just pure damage, pyro or electro damage is all you need, she will contribute a fuck ton because of the insane attack she will have. She is God. Simple as that. There is genuinely not a better support at the moment. I used her with my Hu Tao, Mona for the Hex buff and everything that Mona will give me, and Xingqiu for Overvape, and the damage is nuts. This team shredded the current Stygian at difficulty 5. Yes, Dire can go fuck itself, but difficulty 5 is still something. Holy shit. Fischl is genuinely insane. I cannot stress that enough. And that is the Hexerei review, which ended up Pretty hefty, 20 minutes, but it is plenty of characters to look at, and now I can rest up knowing I finally made this video before Varka's release. Who can use plenty of these characters as supports, but you and I are gonna have to wait a little bit more to find out more about Varka. And before that, we also have an upcoming Abyss reset and version review to take care of. So I will see you then. Goodbye.